Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. As the 2020 presidential field continues to grow, a number of candidates tested out their messages in a traditionally Republican state, Texas. At least 10 Democrats and Republicans who are challenging President Trump or considering doing so spoke at this weekend's South by Southwest conference in Austin. The event served as a testing ground for a number of policy proposals, especially those aimed at tech companies. But there was one non-policy specific topic that kept coming up: the potential candidacy of Joe Biden. CBS News reported last week that Biden is in the final stages of preparing a 2020 campaign, which is expected to launch next month. But a number of candidates and those considering a run appeared to downplay questions about the former vice president entering an already crowded field.
Well, I have a lot of respect for Vice President Biden. And first, we want to make sure he's getting in. But I can only address my own merits. And that is that I'm someone who has been a progressive in that I like to see progress.
Why are you better, more qualified, more worthy of support than the former vice president?
I'm in this race because Washington works great for the wealthy and the well-connected. It's just not working for anyone else.
I know Vice President Biden well. I respect him. I've traveled with him in the past. He's a great man. He served America wonderfully as vice president. We'll have to see if he gets in the race and if there's a place for him within the Democratic Party.
Let's bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns and Scott Detrow. Caitlin is a CBSN political reporter, and Scott is a congressional correspondent for NPR. Welcome to you both. Caitlin, let me start with you. It's interesting to hear the responses there from Democrats and from Howard Schultz. What do you make of the way in which they've responded to this possibility of the former vice president entering the race?
Well, you have the Democrats who are already in the race saying, look, fine, come on in. There is a deep an abiding respect and love for Joe Biden within the Democratic Party. He's been around politics for so long. But at the same time, he is not clearing the field. Yes, he is leading polls at this point, which are reflective, at least at this point in time, of high name ID and high, again, the reverence for him within the party. But none of these candidates have stayed out of the race because Joe Biden is getting in it. Howard Schultz has a different goal here, which is he's been really kind of denigrating the Democratic Party in a lot of ways, labeling it as going too far to the left and calling for something of a more independent streak within the party. He is deciding about whether to run outside of the party. So two different goals there, but it is really interesting that all of these candidates are still in the race despite this long rumored notion that Biden would be getting in.
And Scott, Caitlin mentions the name recognition, of course, that Joe Biden has. So a new poll has Joe Biden leading the Democratic field in Iowa. Does that help or hurt him being the quote unquote front runner, if we can call him that, this early in the campaign?
You know, it certainly keeps him at the top of the conversation, right? I think there's a lot of candidates running. NPR's count is 14 at this point, and it's going to just keep growing. But over and over again, we keep circling back to Joe Biden. And I think that's because of his name recognition. That's because of his long track record in the Democratic Party. But I think it's mostly because of polls. You're seeing national polls, but also polls like the one that just came out of Iowa this weekend, showing him far and away above any other candidate, even candidates like Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris, who've been running for a few months now and have been getting a lot of buzz on the campaign trail. It's a weird split screen here because on one hand, Biden is hovering over everything, and if he jumps into the race, he would be viewed as a front runner. On the other hand, you're seeing this primary play out in its very early days as the Democratic Party shifting away from the Democratic Party of Joe Biden on policy, on tone, on approach to campaigning, and a whole lot of other different ways.
So it's interesting, Scott, that you talk about that sort of political landscape because, Caitlin, Joe Biden, as you know, is set to deliver the keynote address at the International Association of Firefighters Conference on Tuesday. So how important is that speech for Biden ahead of a potential 2020 run?
Well, this is a very politically active union. And remember, in 2016, they made news because they didn't endorse Clinton or Trump, which a lot of critics saw as an opening for Donald Trump. The president of this union has been very supportive of Joe Biden, had been urging him to run. And so we'll see kind of how he is received by this crowd, which, to Scott's point, this is a crowd that could be very influential for Biden and really speaks to kind of the values and points that Joe Biden is going to try to point to in this campaign, making it a campaign that speaks, directly to working class Americans, those voters that Democrats lost in 2016 and are trying to get back in 2020. So we'll see whether there is an endorsement on the horizon here from this group, and we'll get a preview, at least, of of Joe Biden's presidential campaign message.
So our CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe interviewed Howard Schultz at this weekend's South by Southwest Festival in Austin, Texas. And I want to play some of what Schultz had to say about former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg's decision not to run, as well as his take on the current Democratic field. Let's listen to that.
I think it's interesting that Mayor Bloomberg decided not to proceed. Someone who has been a great business person, a great mayor, who could not kind of crack the code of how his position could be perceived positively in a Democratic Party that is moving so far to the left. When I hear the word spoiler, I really believe the spoiler in all this is going to be a far-left Democratic candidate, if that's who gets the nomination, who is walking in the shoes of a socialist. That's going to be the spoiler. Lifelong Republicans who do not want to pull the lever for Donald Trump are not going to pull a lever for someone who is espousing socialistic policies.
Interesting to hear him use that term, socialism and socialistic policies. Scott, let me ask you, what does Michael Bloomberg's exit mean for Howard Schultz? And what are you hearing from Democratic voters about what they're looking for in a candidate?
Yeah, the Bloomberg decision was interesting. On one hand, he never really projected the idea that he was 100% in. I think he was pretty open with the fact that he wasn't sure which way he was going to approach this. Michael Bloomberg is still going to be an enormous factor in 2020. He is committed to spending hundreds of millions of dollars. It's funny at the same time that Michael Bloomberg feels like he might be too moderate for the Democratic Party. He's been leading the fight to push for gun control on the state and federal level and to shift away from carbon dioxide, closing coal-fired power plants and other things. Obviously, two big progressive issues that he's leading on, but at the same time, he felt like there wasn't room for him. I think you could argue that that's another more of the lane for Joe Biden to step forward. I think the big thing that really shook the race a little bit more than Michael Bloomberg not running was Sherrod Brown deciding not to run. He had been getting a lot of buzz in Iowa and New Hampshire. He seemed to be really engaged in the process, and a lot of Democrats in Washington were looking to Sherrod Brown as maybe somebody who could connect with Midwestern voters. There was a lot of surprise when he decided he wasn't going to do it.
Well, speaking of the Midwest, Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar was asked whether some Democratic policy proposals opened up candidates to accusations of pushing a socialist agenda. And I want to play some of what she told our Ed O'Keefe.
We love innovation. We are a capitalist system. So if they are claiming socialism, this is what I say. I want to protect our capitalist system. It is Adam Smith, the founding father of our capitalism, the one who spoke out for capitalism, who said we should fear the power of monopolies. So in order to spur innovation and unleash entrepreneurship, you have to make sure that one firm isn't just dominating a segment. That's what antitrust law is about.
So in these questions of capitalist versus socialist, we put you down as a capitalist.
Put me down as a capitalist.
So, Caitlin, is this likely going to be what we're going to be hearing for Democrats more and more in terms of this idea of capitalist versus socialist as we get closer to 2020?
Right. And Republicans and Donald Trump are already trying to paint the entire Democratic Party as that espouses socialist ideals. And so what you heard there from Klobuchar was really a reaction to this conversation we've been having over the past few days about Elizabeth Warren's proposal to break up big tech. And Warren was pointing to our history with promoting antitrust laws and this being kind of a capitalist notion. You heard Klobuchar invoke some of the same sentiment and rhetoric there. So it will be very interesting to see, at least on that front, when we're talking about that, kind of where this puts other Democrats and how they are supposed to respond to it. Senators running for president have something that others don't, which is that they can propose policy and legislation that could put others kind of on notice or get them to weigh in on these issues. But I think it's really interesting that Senator Warren was kind of laying an important fault line within the party on that issue, on that policy proposal that she put forward. And it could squeeze some of her colleagues, people like Kamala Harris in California or others who have some kind of relationship or constituency with the tech industry, for example. But this larger theme that Klobuchar was speaking there, I think, is resonating with some Democrats.
Meantime, the Democratic National Committee announced Monday that they will hold their 2020 nominating convention in Milwaukee. So, Scott, what is the message that Democrats are trying to send with this decision?
Well, as someone who partially grew up in Milwaukee, I was thrilled to see that announcement. I think Democrats are trying to send a message. Obviously, the fact that Hillary Clinton did not campaign in Wisconsin and lost Wisconsin to the shock of most Democrats is a big part of the conversation about what went wrong in 2016 and how do Democrats correct in 2020. If you look at the track record, the idea of a convention site as a message to try and flip a state doesn't really have a great track record. Democrats were in Pennsylvania last time, one of the states that they lost. North Carolina, Republicans in 2008 went to Minnesota thinking that they could flip Minnesota with the convention choice. Doesn't really go over, and if anything, it kind of bogs the city down for a few days. But that's clearly part of the message that Democrats are going to have. I mean, Amy Klobuchar making her first campaign stop in Wisconsin sent that message, and whoever the eventual nominee is, you can expect them to basically camp out in those 3 states that Donald Trump won last time.
Yeah. All right. Well, from the Midwest back to the South, it wasn't just Democratic contenders who took their messages to Texas. Former Republican governor of Massachusetts, Bill Weld, was also there. He talked to Ed O'Keefe about why he's weighing a potential challenge to President Trump.
A lot of people said, if you're running as an R, I'm in. That tends to be more people on the finance side. But no negative feedback except from the Republican National Committee and state chairs who have been ordered to make sure that there's no primary, and I think if the president had his way, there would be no election. I can't prove this, but I don't think that Mr. Trump is a student of history. And it pays to have lived a life and confronted the issues that you would as President of the United States. He's got a lot of experience as a reality TV actor and host, and we all respect that's not what we need in the Oval Office.
All right, so Scott, realistically, what kind of support would someone like Weld need to mount a serious challenge against the president?
Well, let's remember that Weld left the Republican Party before he was on the Libertarian ticket with Gary Johnson in 2016. And that was not an effort that really people thought that could catch fire. It didn't really get much support in the end. I'm not sure the Republican Party is really Bill Weld's Republican Party anymore. I think he probably knows that on some level. Still, the fact that not just Weld, but Maryland Governor Larry Hogan, former Ohio Governor John Kasich are at least thinking about a primary challenge, I think indicates the fact that they think the president is vulnerable. That being said, when you look at primary challenges that really do hurt incumbents, they come from the right for Republicans, the left from Democrats. It's hard to see how a challenge from the moderate side really catches on with primary voters.
Well, Weld was also asked about his relationship with Special Counsel Robert Mueller. The two worked together in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Boston and also at the Justice Department during the Reagan administration. Here's what he had to say about Mueller and what his report could mean for President Trump.
I've known him well for a long time. He's the straightest guy I've ever met.
Have you talked to him at all in the last 2 years?
Oh, no. Are you kidding? Do I look stupid?
Well, not necessarily in regards to the Trump investigation.
No. Since he was appointed, I haven't talked to him at all. I talked to him when he was at the FBI, but that's just Justice Department.
As someone who's worked with him and knows him, what does he likely make of all of this attention that's now afforded to him?
All I can tell you is he will play it straight. So my prediction is that whatever Bob Mueller comes up with will be pretty airtight. But I'm not predicting it's going to be the straw that breaks the president's back legally.
Interesting. So, Caitlin, what's your reaction to that?
Well, an interesting relationship that the two have, proving that it's such a small world
really
and what we're talking about. What's interesting about kind of going back to the conversation we were just having is that Trump is still so incredibly popular among Republicans, and they have had his back throughout the entirety of this Mueller investigation as we've seen it so far. But the big question mark has always been, does the Mueller report produce anything that would cause Republicans to really break ranks from President Trump? And so that's why it's going to be very interesting to see the moves of the Larry Hogans or the Bill Welds or others who kind of are laying some kind of groundwork or at least interest in a possible presidential run if, in fact, Republicans abandon Trump. We are nowhere near that yet, and there are so many questions left about what the Mueller report actually will produce. But kind of combining those two elements, I think that's kind of what he's starting to refer to.
Scott, on the Democratic side, in an interview with the Washington Post, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said she is against impeaching the president. I would imagine that declaration by Nancy Pelosi perhaps has some people a little bit uncomfortable in the House. What did you make of that?
She's already gotten a pretty fiery response from Tom Steyer, who, of course, did not run for president, but is spending a whole lot of money trying to get Democrats to impeach President Trump. You know, when you read the full quote that Speaker Pelosi gave to the Washington Post, I'm not sure she's saying anything that she hasn't already said. She has long been on record that she's very hesitant about any attempts to impeach President Trump. And she says there's no way for impeachment to work unless it's bipartisan, unless it seems like the move of last resort, that there's no other choice and the crimes or the misbehavior is so high that it meets that bar. That's basically what she's saying here, but with a little bit more of a fiery top to the quote. I think the thing that's notable is Pelosi saying it's not really worth impeaching him. I haven't heard the audio of that. I'm not sure if she was being flipped, but I think the fact that it's not worth it is the thing that she's going to be answering questions about when Congress is fully in town the rest of the week.
All right. Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you. Scott Detrow, stay with us, please.